Chapter 10 Nu Lin. The next morning, when Will rose from the huge bed in his room, he could smell breakfast being prepared downstairs by Mai Li. He walked into the kitchen to find Mai Li and, to his very great surprise, another little Chinese girl speaking to each other in rapid-fire Chinese. He greeted both in Chinese, and the girl fell on the floor, kowtowing to Will. He was startled by this behavior, having never seen it before. When he stepped forward to pull her to her feet, she shrimped backward away from him. Mai Li told the girl to stand up, that she had nothing to fear from Will, and Will repeated her words in Chinese with a soft voice he hoped was reassuring. The girl rose with fear in her eyes, but soon was speaking softly to Will and Mai Li. Her name was Nu Lin, and she told them of how she, her mother, and 2 brothers had been taken as slaves. A huge boat with white sails came into the small cove of our village. They fired cannons and killed several people. Men came ashore with muskets and swords, killed the elders, and took everyone else as slaves. My mother was taken by the captain because he thought her handsome, so Mother and I were not chained with the others. We were on the boat for many months. I am not sure exactly how many. My brothers were sold to another slave dealer and sent to another boat, and I never saw them again. My mother died of fever only days before we made landfall. They were going to throw me overboard along with the dead body of my mother. However, they decided that would be a waste, since we were already so close to port. They agreed since I was an attractive child, they might be able to sell me when they got to port. She had come ashore only 2 days ago, escaping through a small porthole that had been left open because they thought it too small for anyone to get through. She came ashore in the middle of the night, hid for 2 days without food, drinking only rainwater from the puddles in the street. The smell of cooking food had brought her into the area of the market Mai Li visited the day before. Seeing another Chinese face, she followed Mai Li home. She slept outside on the back porch behind the pile of stove wood. Mai Li found her sleeping there the next morning when she went to get wood for the stove. Mai Li took her in, gave her tea, and had fed her bread and fish leftovers from the night before. Mai Li set about heating water for a bath in the large copper tub that had been added to the house at the request of Lord BraitheWaite. Soon the girl was clean and smiling broadly. Mai Li told her that Will and his family were kind and wouldn't send her away or sell her. She let her know she wasn't a slave anymore, but a free person. She explained to her the problems that she would face in her new life and how she must behave outside the home if she were to remain a free person. She would be allowed to study, learn to read and write, and expected to become an asset to her new family. Nu Lin was overjoyed and showed it. She worked hard in the kitchen to help Mai Li with household chores, but still dropped to the floor and kowtowed every time she came face to face with Will, even when both Will and Mai Li kept telling her it was no longer necessary. Every evening after dinner, Mai Li began to teach Nu Lin to speak English and how to read and write both English and Chinese. Mai Li found her to be intelligent, and Nu Lin worked hard to please her. When Mai Li and Will talked about their plans, they decided they would speak in Chinese most of the time, in case someone was watching and listening. Since Nu Lin couldn't speak English yet, there was no danger of her repeating anything she heard, not that she was not trusted. They both felt affection toward the small girl, especially Mai Li, who had genuine empathy for her circumstances. Will, as instructed, visited the shop of Fox and Bell, tailors of London, and parted with a good deal of the gold Lord BraitheWaite had given him for new clothing. Will was accustomed to the lightweight clothes Mai Li taught the family to wear, and thought the clothes displayed in the shop windows were, well, too much pomp and poof, but allowed the tailors to do their jobs. They said the clothes would be ready in a fortnight, and asked Will to return in a few days to finish the fitting, once the cloth had been cut and rough-stitched. Will had an appointment with the firm of Pett & Pett the next day to begin his study, and was soon in the firm's library, where a clerk helped him with the task of organizing books to read from the list given to him by Phineas Pett. Will was treated only a little better than the clerk, even with his letter of introduction from Lord BraitheWaite. He knew that he would be required to work and read many hours each day. After tea with Peter Pett, the old man of the firm who had been the shipwright for King James, Will was dismissed for the day. He packed 2 of the books he had selected, one on ship design and planning, and the other on the organization of stock companies, and set off for the house. He arrived home to the smell of food in the kitchen and called out to Mai Li. She met him in the dining room with Nu Lin standing by her side. Nu Lin dropped to her knees before a sharp command from Mai Li brought her back to her feet. Nu Lin said to Will in English, "Welcome home, honored elder brother," and smiled hugely. Will smiled back, walked forward, and gave the tiny girl a hug, and knew in his heart that they had been as lucky to find her as she had been to find them. They now had another trustworthy person to help with the task at hand and to help watch their backs. Each day seemed the same for the first fortnight, a regular routine of reading and studying for both Will and Nu Lin. Most nights, dinner was eaten while they sat around the kitchen table together and spoke Chinese. Will wondered what people would think if they could see this, but they were careful to keep the windows shut and covered with heavy drapes, just in case. Chapter 11: A Morning Visitor. The next day, just before Will left for Pet and Pet, someone knocked at the front door. Nu Lin, now in new set of English clothes, having been instructed on how to answer the door and announce visitors, opened the door. She asked in her best English, "Who I say is calling, sir?" Will's father gawked down at the small with a Chinese face with his mouth hanging open. Will walked into the entryway and said, "Hi, Dad, meet Nu Lin." Did you find another Chinese girl?" stuttered Will's father. "We didn't find her, she found us. Come on in and we will catch you up. Why are you here? I didn't expect you so soon." Mai Li brought fresh tea and biscuits into the dining room and sat down with Will and his father. William brought out his leather-bound book and pulled a letter from it, handed it to Will, who broke the wax seal. It was from Lord BraitheWaite with instructions for investigating some new rumors concerning the manager of his shipbuilding firm. It also confirmed the stories of the country bumpkin had reached Bristol as planned. "I will remain in town for 2 days. I have supplies to purchase," William said. Mai Li called Nu Lin from the kitchen where she was cleaning and told her to prepare a room for William. Will sat for the next few hours telling his father about his experiences at Pet and bringing him up to date on what had been accomplished so far. He handed his father a short report to carry to Lord BraitheWaite that contained the same information he had just gone over with his father, less the story of Nu Lin. Will was sure his father would relate the news of the new addition to the family. Will sent a note to Pet and Pet's clerk by a street urchin who had been hanging around the market and chosen for such jobs by Mai Li. The small boy told Mai Li that he didn't know his name or how old he was. "People's just call me Rags," said the small boy. "I don't have no folks, I belong only to me. From now on your name will be Edward James Timble, and you are to be 9 years old." She gave him a copper penny and told him to go buy some food and to be at the house first thing in the morning. So, another hungry kid without any family was given an opportunity to earn food for his empty belly. He arrived at the kitchen door as arranged the next morning. With a smile on his face, a piece of bread and cheese in his grubby little hand, and a copper coin in his pocket, Edward ran to deliver his note. His smile was because he had been promised another coin upon his return, more food, and a regular job running errands if he promised to be trustworthy. When he returned with a note sealed with wax and handed it to Mai Li, she led him into the kitchen and gave him some fish stew that he ate with a huge smile on his face. Mai Li asked him if he would like to work for the family and live with them. This brought an even larger smile. The smile left, however, when he was told that if he were to remain in the house, he would be required to bathe and bathe regularly, something he had never done. Edward's eyes shone big as Mai Li poured hot water into the copper bath and told him to disrobe. He flat out refused until William came into the kitchen and assured him that taking a bath would not in fact make him deathly ill as he had been told all his life. Will told him that he himself bathed daily. Will gently coaxed him into the hot bath with the promise of another copper coin. In a few minutes the smile returned and Edward began to enjoy the hot water. Mai Li returned with some used clothing she purchased at the market. They were well worn but clean. They would do until she could buy cloth and make some new ones. She planned to use this task to teach Nu Lin to sew, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, as Will's father would say. After a short discussion, Will and Mai Li agreed that Edward would join their household and be treated as a family member. Edward smiled his broadest smile when he was told he would be allowed to live in this beautiful house and be taught to read and write in sums, as if he were a gentleman's son. Upon donning his new clothes, he gave a deep bow to the people who were now his new family and said, "I'm going to be the finest gentleman in all England." They had another new member of the family who now sat around the kitchen table to be tutored to read along with Nu Lin, whom Edward was very shy around. William left the next morning to purchase the steel he had come to town to fetch, and Will returned to Pet and Pet for another day with the clerk and more books. Upon his arrival, he was handed a note which directed him to the model shop in the company's buildings down the block. Phineas Pett himself met him there and began to go over the plans for the new ships that were to be built. He was quite patient with Will's questions that Will tried to keep to a minimum. They spent the entire day discussing the ships, asking the timberman in to discuss the keel to be laid within a fortnight. Will took notes in his leather-bound book given to him by his father, knowing he would be up half the night reading to make sure he understood every aspect of what they had gone over. Will was home before tea, and William arrived only a few minutes later. They decided to dine out and spend a bit of the lordship's gold with a local victualler. Will dressed in one of the new suits just delivered the day before by the Fox and Bell tailors of London, and off they went. They dined on pheasant, fresh roast venison, new potatoes, and greens, but by the time pudding was served, they both pushed away from the table, leaving most of the sweets behind. Well satisfied, they started the short walk back to the house. Even though they were talking, Will noticed as they passed the livery that they had picked up two men who were following them, none to discreetly. Will, hearing the approach of the men, stopped. William walked ahead several steps before he realized his son was no longer by his side. He turned to face Will and said, "What the devil?" The two stepped forward and each placed a hand on Will's shoulder and grabbed his coat. One placed a dirk to Will's throat. The one with the dirk in his hand said, "We be having your purse, me lords. We're sure such fine gentlemen as yourself wants no trouble." "Fellows, I believe you've made a grievous error. I'm not a gentleman and I enjoy trouble." Will laughed with a hearty laugh. The two men gawked at him, trying to decide what to do now that their bluff was called. While trying to decide what to do next, Will executed folding wings. He stepped back, circled both his arms up, striking them in the face and dislodging the knife. Will continued around, locking around both men's arms at the elbow and then upward as he stepped forward, dislocating their shoulders with a loud scrunch. He stepped back between them, grabbed both men by the hair, and bashed their heads together. They both fell to the ground, moaning. He knelt next to them and said in a quiet voice, "You're lucky, my friends, that I'm a peaceful man and spared your miserable lives. Take the message hereabouts that I won't tolerate being annoyed by your kind." Will and William walked away, leaving them lying in the street. William and Will spent a companionable evening reading and occasionally discussing a question Will had about the plans or modeling. The next morning, William was loaded and set out toward home with Will's note to his mother and the report for Lord BraitheWaite. He shook Edward's hand and told him to study hard and make a proper gentleman. Edward stood up straight and said, "I will do me best, sir." "Do my best," corrected little Nu Lin, and she curtsied in her new dress, received a stern look from Mai Li, and stepped back into her place. She and Edward had begun to compete in their studies, and even though Edward had the advantage of growing up in England, Nu Lin had the better memory and was soon his equal. However, Edward had a talent for numbers and understood money and values better. Will thought he showed great promise. Edward's talent as a runner was improving as well, as he soon was able to read well enough to read the signs on the shops. William drove away in the wagon headed for home. He turned wave to the family, which was now richer by two. Chapter 12 Home. Will's time in London was ending. He completed his tutoring, books read, notes taken, hours and hours of study. He spent most mornings of the last fortnight hands-on in the modeling shops producing a working model from the working plans for the contract. He gently packed the model in a box he had made for this purpose. He would be taking it to use in the yard at Bristol. And he was quite proud of the work and could not wait to show it to his father. So, Will and his troops, Mai Li, Nu Lin, and Edward James, packed up, boarded the coach, and headed back to Bristol. Will didn't look forward to the long dusty trip, but was soon absorbed in a new book he had purchased, while Mai Li set the two children at lessons. His last letter from Lord BraitheWaite gave him instructions to visit the farm upon his return after he visited with his parents. They arrived at his parents' home above the bakery a little after sundown. They were all tired from the long journey back from London on a dusty, bumpy road. After a small meal and, of course, a short explanation of the new additions to his mother, Will went to bed. Mai Li settled in the children in her small room, and soon all were asleep. The next morning at breakfast, Jessica met the children who had been half asleep upon their arrival the night before. Will said, "Mother, let me introduce you to meet Nu Lin Timble and Edward James Timble, the newest members of our family." Nu Lin curtsied, and Edward bowed. "Hello, Nu Lin. Hello, Edward. Welcome to our family." And Jessica hugged both the children. Both rewarded her with large smiles. "It's a good thing we'll have a new house soon. Your father started a new house on 20 acres some months ago, didn't he tell you?" William looked at his wife and said, "I was saving that for a surprise when he returned." Jessica knew this probably wasn't the reason. He'd had too much on his mind while in London and forgot to tell his son about the new house. After a good breakfast cooked by Mai Li, they all got into the wagon and drove out to see the construction. They arrived in time to see 4 men struggling with a roof beam, so Will and his father jumped from the wagon to help. Soon everyone was out of the wagon and helping. Will thought it would be a fine home and silently approved of the place his mother and father had chosen to build. It was near a small group of large oaks where he and Mai Li had spent so many hours practicing the dances. It brought back many memories and gave Will a feeling of comfort and home. Will knew he would seldom spend time in this new home, as he was a man now with adventure ahead in new places, both far and near. After spending the morning with his parents, Will, with Mai Li at his back, set off on horses for the farm of Lord BraitheWaite. The bulldog answered the front door and said, "His lordship is expecting you. Please come this way," and they were led into the office. Lord BraitheWaite came in a moment later, and after directing them to chairs, he seated himself. He nodded to Mai Li and addressed Will. "Will, our plans are in motion. News has traveled back from my sources in the London offices that the country bumpkin will be joining the firm in Bristol and is considered no threat. The story going around is that the only reason you were given the job is in deference to your father's service to me. They have underestimated you just as we contrived. They have no idea there's a fox among the chickens until we spring the trap." His lordship seemed to really enjoy the subterfuge. He offered them tea, and Will said, "No, thank you, my lord. I'd like to go over what you think is the best way to proceed." They spent the next 2 hours planning out the strategy for Will's entry into the company. Will and Mai Li set off for home and discussed the meeting on the way. Upon their arrival, they found Nu Lin and Edward with Will's mother picking runner beans from Mai Li's garden. She greeted Will and hugged and kissed both him and Mai Li. She told them there would be fresh of roast venison for dinner. One of William's men had been lucky at the hunt and was sharing the kill. Mai Li wrinkled her nose as she didn't care for the gamey meat unless well smoked. She said nothing but followed everyone indoors to finish preparing the night's feast. William came riding in just as the table was set. Everyone gathered around as Jessica pulled a beautiful roast from the spit in the fireplace and placed it on a large platter. Everyone cheered as she set it on the table. Edward said, "I've never seen such a beautiful thing." As he inhaled the aroma of the meat, potatoes, and dishes of vegetables everyone worked so hard to prepare. There were several loaves of fresh bread just up from Mrs. Stockton's ovens and freshly churned butter. Nu Lin sat with large eyes and soon had a plate of food in front of her almost as big as she was. Will stood to make a toast. To home and family, and they all drank and drank in the happiness of the moment. "And what a family we have! 2 sons and 2 daughters, well, sort of anyway, and only a moon cycle ago Jessica and I had only 1 son. They all laughed and ate and ate and ate.
Thank you for joining me for another chapter of There's a Pirate in the Family. I hope you enjoyed today's adventure as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If this story carried you away, made you smile, or kept you wondering what comes next, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And I truly want to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from and what part of the story captured your imagination today. Your comments help shape the journey ahead. Until next time, keep your compass steady, your curiosity sharp, and your heart open to adventure. This is There's a Pirate in the Family, and the voyage continues soon.